The Midnight Gang by David Williams and illustrated by Tony Ross. Chapter 9. B for Basement. Pacing down the brightly lit corridor outside the children's ward, it suddenly occurred to Tom that he had absolutely no idea where he was going. His new friend Sally had delayed him somewhat, and now the other 3 children were long gone. What's more, Lord Funt Hospital was a spooky place after dark. Distant sounds echoed down the long corridors. The building was tall and wide. There were 44 floors of wards and operating rooms. There was everything from rooms for delivering babies to a mortuary where people were taken after they died. The hospital was home to hundreds of patients and nearly as many staff. At midnight, all the patients should be fast asleep. But there would still be night staff, including cleaners and security guards, roaming the corridors. If Tom was discovered out of his bed, he would be in big trouble. What's more, he was wearing a pink frilly nightdress. If anyone was to see him, he would have some serious explaining to do. Tom looked to the direction signs on the wall, which weren't much help, as letters had fallen off. Entrance and exit had become knit. Accident and emergency was now cider. Reception was simply P.O. Surgery now read sewer. Radiology had become radlog, whatever that was. Administration was now mint. Theatre was heat. Children's ward read simply war, which might not be such a bad description of what it was like in there. Rehabilitation had changed into habit on. Physiotherapy had become hot heap. X-ray had become simply Ray. So if you were looking for a man called Ray, all you had to do was follow the arrow. There was a sign that read IFS, ifs, which Tom guessed must have been lifts at some distant point in the hospital's past, and so he followed the arrow. When he reached the lifts, Tom noticed that the arrow above the large metal shiny doors was descending rapidly. He guessed it might be the 3 children travelling down. The boy watched as the arrow swung all the way down to B for basement. Tom gulped. It was bound to be dark in the basement, and Tom hated the dark. What's more, the thought of bumping into the porter flashed through his mind. What if Tom felt a hand on his shoulder to stop him, and when he looked round, it was the terrifying-looking man staring back at him? For a moment, the boy felt like turning back, and then realised that Sally might think that he was a scaredy cat. So with some hesitation, he pushed the button and waited nervously for the lift to come. Bing! The doors opened. Bing! The doors closed. With his finger trembling, Tom pushed B for basement, and the lift trundled down to the darkest depths of the hospital. With a jolt, the lift stopped. Bing! The doors opened, and Tom stepped out into the darkness. The boy was now alone in the basement of Lord Funt Hospital. Good picture as well, look. His bare feet felt the cold, wet concrete beneath him. Above him on the ceiling was a strip of fluorescent lights, though most had blown, meaning it was all but pitch black down here. Bing! Tom jumped. It was just the lift doors closing after him. The sound of water dripping from pipes echoed along the corridor ahead of him. I need Mr. Knight now because he can go. I did it! The sound of water dripping from pipes echoed along the corridor ahead of him. Slowly, Tom made his way along it. When he came to the end, there were 4 corridors, 2 to the left and 2 to the right. It was a maze down here. The boy looked to see if he could make out any wheelchair tracks on the floor. It was hard to see anything with so little light, so Tom bent down to study the floor. At that moment, a creature brushed past his face. Ah! His scream echoed down the corridor. At first, Tom thought it might have been a rat, but he could just see the creature hopping off. It looked more like a bird. But if it was a bird, what was it doing all the way down here? In the dirt on the floor, Tom could see some tyre marks heading down one of the corridors on the right. so he followed them. After a few paces, he could feel the stale air in the basement becoming warmer. Just up ahead was a giant furnace where the hospital's waste was being burned. Not far from that, Tom saw a huge basket on wheels. He looked inside. It was full of laundry. Above it was a small hatch. Just then, more bedsheets tumbled out of the hatch and fell into the laundry basket. The boy realised that it must be the end of a chute leading down from the wards above. Every few paces there were doors and more corridors. Tom followed the tyre tracks as they snaked their way through the basement. The tracks led on to a corridor that was pitch black. All the lights in this section of the basement must be broken, thought Tom. The boy hesitated before going forward. His worst fear was the dark. Still, it seemed foolish to turn back now. He might be about to find the other children and uncover their secret midnight adventure. Slowly Tom tiptoed forward. Soon it was so dark that he could not see his own hand in front of his face. Now he had to grope along the damp walls to find his way. Just then, clang! A deafening noise echoed down the basement corridors. It sounded like a heavy metal door being shut. Tom wondered who else might be down here with him. The porter? Frozen in fear. The boy stopped dead. He listened and listened and listened. But now all he could hear was silence. A deep dread all but swallowed him up. Although he stood still, he felt as if he was running or falling or drowning. Tom realised that coming down to the basement alone was a terrible mistake. He had to get out of here right now. He began to retrace his footsteps, but in a panic he lost his way. Soon he was running barefoot down the corridors, the pink frilly nightdress flapping as he went. Out of breath and still feeling woozy from that cricket ball hitting his head, Tom stopped for a moment. Then he felt something grab his shoulder. He turned round. It was a hand. Ah! He screamed. Great picture. End of chapter 9.